When it comes to controversial subjects in the reptile hobby, keeping several animals of different species in the same enclosure kind of takes the cake. And today we're going to discuss, is it okay? If it is, how is it okay? And why you would want to do it in the first place. My name's Adam, you're watching Wickens Wicked Reptiles, stick around. Now, normally I have a co-host, but the animals in here they would run away from me or not be handleable. So let's go over what's in this enclosure, why I think it's okay to keep several species in the enclosure, and the right way to do it. So before the nitty gritty, this is a 36 by 24 by 18 inches deep enclosure. And inside of here, we've got 4 Amazon milk frogs and we've got 2 giant day geckos. The main question I think is why? Why would you want to keep several species in the same enclosure? Well, the reason we keep reptiles at all is for us. It's for our own enjoyment. That's what keeping pets really is, unless you are breeding some crazy animals in your basement that have no chance of surviving in the wild unless you're breeding them, but I don't think that's what you're doing, is it? So for me, I'm trying to give my animals the best life they can possibly live in captivity, but in a way that's enjoyable for us to watch. And there are some benefits to keeping several species in the same enclosure. First of all, diversity. If you're looking at a painting, do you want to see something that is kind of static, or do you want to see a dynamic image? And that's one of the reasons why people like to make enclosures like this, which are basically living art. It's a bioactive enclosure. There's tons of different plants, tons of different textures. There's a whole bunch of things going on, even a waterfall, which is right behind my big bald head. And I think that's kind of the interesting part about different species, is that it adds another level of dynamic. So we covered why, but should you? Well, that really comes down to a few categories. The first thing is compatibility of the animals. Are they compatible at all? Well, obviously they have to be. You can't put something that is a prey item with a predator and then expect them to live and be okay. The predator is going to eat the prey. That's how nature works. For the same reason you wouldn't keep a cat and a bunny in the same enclosure, you wouldn't keep, say, a king snake with a smaller snake. So we'll use this enclosure as a great example. Now, I have other setups similar to this, right? Right beside me, which is the noise that you're hearing, I've got 2 different species, a yellow belly slider with a Mississippi map turtle and a bunch of fish, and that works fine. I've also got some dart frogs with mourning geckos in the same enclosure. That works fine too, but let's use this because they're bigger animals and there's more of them in the same enclosure. So day geckos, which are from Madagascar, and Amazon milk frogs, which are from Central and South America. So really you'd think maybe not the most compatible. So let's just break it down as if it was a care guide very quickly, and then let's move on. First of all, is there enough space? Well, look at the enclosure size, and if you look at a bunch of different types of care guides from respected sources, right? So let's use the Josh's Frogs care guides. I like Josh's Frogs. I think they do a great job. I trust their care guides. So for giant day geckos, it says that they need an 18 by 18 by 24 enclosure for a pair, for 2. Okay, well this is literally double the size of that enclosure, and I think because it's got so many hiding spaces, because it's so naturalistic, because it's got so much room, I think you could say it would be better set up or have a better level of enrichment and more hiding spaces and be more comfortable for animals than your average like fake plastic plants and kind of barren, right? So let's say that obviously they've got twice as much room as they need according to care guides. Amazon milk frogs, depending on the care guide that you look at, you can keep between 2 and 6 in an 18 by 18 by 24, which is half this size. So if you put those things together, that means you could keep 2 geckos and up to 6 frogs. There's 2 geckos and 4 frogs. So the space does work. Am I cutting it a little bit close in terms of space? I personally believe yes. I know there's a lot of people that would argue that I could probably have more in here, but I don't think so. This is kind of the max for me, but the thing is, and I'll beat this dead horse the entire video, watch your animals. You have to supervise. You have to be watching your animals to make sure that they're getting along, they're not getting sick, they don't feel stressed, and we'll go over that more later. And we'll go through some more kind of ideas of what you could keep together at the end as well. So if you're looking for ideas of kind of keep this with this, we'll cover that at the end. Next is temperature and humidity. Do they have the same range? Well, the answer is yes. The correct humidity level for these day geckos is between 50 and 70%, and for the milk frog, it's an even broader range, between 50 and 90%. So if I keep it around 70%, which right now it's actually at 67%, then we're a-okay. It hits a sweet spot for both species. Now for temperature, it's about 75 to 80 degrees Fahrenheit for the day geckos. That's the sweet spot, with a basking area also, but that's the ambient, 75 to 80. For the milk frogs, it's about 70 to 85. So you want to hit a sweet spot, which it is. It's 76 degrees right now, so it's in the sweet spot for both animals. So another great example, if you're keeping, say, a dart frog species with a tree frog species, which is pretty darn common, say a red-eye tree frog with some sort of dart frog from that native range, let's suppose that you have Dendrobates auratus and you have red-eye tree frogs. Well, I've literally found those the same day in the same place in the same square kilometer in Costa Rica a month ago. Here's a video if you want to watch. So that would definitely work if you have the right parameters for both, which is definitely doable. The next thing is diet, and I think this is really important because are they going to be fighting over food? Well, here's the thing. I'm going to actually cut myself off. When are they active? The nice thing is they're active during the day and the night depending on the species. So day geckos are active during the day and the milk frogs are active during the night. So they're not going to be competing for resources most of the time because your Amazon milk frogs, although I've seen this behavior, are rarely going to be basking on the platforms underneath the halogen light. And back to diet, they're not going to be fighting over the food source. As long as you feed, say, the day geckos their insects during the day and then you also feed insects during the night, sure, they might wake up during their not normal patterns of being awake, but you're going to see that they're not going to be competing as much as if you only fed once during one time of the day or night. And even so, if you let a bunch of crickets go in there, or even if you tongue feed each one, there's a way to get around that. It's really not that big of a deal, as long as the diet is similar, which it is. The day geckos eat a prepared diet, which the frogs don't, but if they do ingest it accidentally, no big deal. And they both eat crickets that are dusted with calcium and D3. So that's pretty easy. Shake up some crickets with some mineral, vitamin, D3, the whole thing, right? I'm not doing a care guide, but we can if you want. Leave a comment and a like and we'll make a care guide for both species. And then you toss them in there, let it rip. And then you can also feed other things like mealworms, dubia root, whatever, right? You can feed the thing because they all feed on the same sort of insects, which is why mourning geckos and dart frogs work so well, because mourning geckos and dart frogs will both eat fruit flies of a similar size, depending on species, of course. Don't keep mourning geckos with terribilis dart frogs because they might get big enough to eat the mourning geckos, but if you did Dendrobates auratus or most Dendrobates species, you'd be okay. Anyway, back to task here. That's the compatibility. Make sure those three things specifically are compatible with the two species or several species that you're going to put in the same enclosure. And the easiest way, usually like the red-eye tree frog and dart frog type of comparison that I made earlier, is that they're from the same place. But just because you're not from the same place doesn't mean you don't have the same environment. I can keep animals like jeweled lacerdas outside here in Ontario, Canada during the summer because we have a very similar climate to where they're from in the wild when we have summer months. So you don't have to have them from the same place as long as they're not going to be competing for food and resources and things like that. So they're compatible, they're not going to be fighting for resources, and you have enough space. The next thing is enough resources. And one thing that people don't really take into account is hiding spaces. Because if these animals are going to be fighting for hiding spaces, they're going to be stressed out. Let's suppose that you're at a big giant box that's made of glass, like this one, which actually only has a front panel because the sides are blacked out. But regardless, you want to feel secure. And maybe you want to feel secure by yourself. You don't want to hide with another species or even a member of the same species that you are. You want to be alone. Well, you have to accommodate that for both species. So here we've got tons of perches, tons of ledges, tons of holes in the background. We've got tons of areas for all these animals to hide. I could have way more animals all in hiding in here. You'd never see them if I wanted to. Of course, I'm not going to. I have enough animals in this enclosure. If you have multiple species that are active during the day and need basking platforms, make sure you've got plenty. In here, I have plenty. I've got ledges everywhere. I even have this bamboo stick that kind of goes from one end to the other. So if you want to be up here closer to the light or farther away, you can kind of pick the place that has the best level of UVB and also heat for you. I'm just gonna stick observation in there again, make sure that they're not fighting over basking spots and things like that. And because this is in my living room, sometimes I'll take a break for an hour, sit with the dogs, and just kind of watch the enclosures I have in this room and make sure that there's no fighting, make sure that they're kind of moving around, acting normally. Anyway, let's move on. Another overlooked thing is cleanliness and parasites. This is especially true if you are overcrowding an enclosure. A great way to kind of combat this is to make sure that if it's a bioactive enclosure, which all the examples I'm using are bioactive. I don't have experience putting different species together and not a bioactive, so I can't help you with that. But if we're talking bioactive, which I think most of us are if we're cohabbing different species, the best place to start is putting a very established cleanup crew. Isopods, maybe darkling beetles even, and springtails as well. And make sure you have a very robust population of these animals inside the enclosure to clean up and break down the waste. Now this doesn't excuse you from spot cleaning, because these animals are rather large, they're rather large frogs and one of the bigger gecko species on the earth. I do spot clean, I do wipe things down, but I don't change the substrate. But also, the animals that I have in there, the isopods and springtails and darkling beetles and things like that, do a great job eating and breaking down the waste. Because I think the number one problem you're going to have after aggression and fighting for resources, if all that's fine, the problem you might have is parasites or things that are going to be a problem because of uncleanliness. So that's on you, and also to make sure that you have enough of a cleanup crew and enough space in order for the poop to be broken down. So basically, in short, make sure they're compatible, watch for signs of stress, watch for to make sure that they're eating properly, give them tons of spaces for basking and hiding, and make sure they have their own space in this enclosure. Just like when you go to a rainforest and you find these animals close to each other, we literally found 3 species of different frogs on the same leaf when we were in Costa Rica, but they have an area to go away. They don't have to be together. And that should be the same thing with your community setup. Make sure that all of these animals have a place to get away from each other to mitigate stress. And that's it. That's what I think about cohabitation of different species. What do you think? Let me know in the comment section below. Do you agree? Do you have different tips? I would love to know what you do. What species do you keep together? I would love to know in the comment section below. Let's start a little thread about what you keep in the enclosure. What type of different species do you keep? If you liked the video and you want more like this, please hit like, please hit subscribe. Really helps the channel and really appreciate it. And as always, a special thanks to the Patreon supporters. You guys are freaking amazing. You guys have seen this enclosure. I posted a picture of this enclosure probably 2 months ago. You get to see things early, extra content, videos early, discounts on the merch, and things in my collection that I don't talk about on the channel, you guys know about. For as little as $1 a month, you can be a Patreon supporter too. And I think that's it. Because I do videos twice a week, that means I'll see you on Thursday.